against religion and race against race, to divide their people so that they can empower themselves. I saw how their leadership, if you can call it leadership, kills economies, drives economies into the ground. How people are denied basic universal civil rights under their control. Real is just pure darkness, and I could tell you stories about that. But I think most of you, if not all of you, understand what I'm talking about there. So anyway, in Donald Trump, I see one of them. He praises these same dictators who I worked against. He shows that he demonstrates that he doesn't believe he has any limitations on what he would do or can do. He doesn't respect our courts. He doesn't respect our balance of powers. When he visited us in the House, a member asked him about his thoughts on the Constitution, and he interrupted that member before the member could even finish asking their question to proclaim his commitment to elements of the Constitution that don't exist. So that's what kind of guy he is. If it were just ignorance, that would be one thing. But when you see him threaten, the press and other basic civil liberties, to me, that's a red flag. But it's also about the fact that he divides this country, and we've been divided for far too long. We don't need to be divided. And by the way, that's not what conservatism is. I'm a conservative. I've always been a conservative. I've also only voted for Republicans until now. But I'm an American first, and then a conservative. Then I think about party. But conservatism, in my view, is a commitment to the founding principles that made this country the most prosperous and powerful on earth. It's the idea that we were all created equal. I get choked up when I say this. It shocks me that here we are in 2016, and I have to be out there stumping for this notion that we were all created equal. Now, how are we at that point right now? But it's not just that. It's that we have rights that were given to us by God to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And all of these things, all these core values of our great nation, these universal values, were not being represented by the two major party candidates. And I knew they wouldn't be by Donald Trump, and I knew they wouldn't be by Hillary Clinton too. She's just more big centralized government that pushes down top-down solutions from Washington D.C. and denies or doesn't offer any accountability to the American people. We all get that. So I believed, and I believed then and believe now, that we needed better options, that someone needed to stand up for what was right, for these basic universal values of our country. And so after the conventions, I reached out to an organization called Better for America. Many of you have probably heard of this. It's who was involved. Bill Kristol was involved. Some of Mitt's inner circle team were involved. And other good Americans, people who I consider patriots. They were looking for an independent conservative to run. They tried former candidates for the presidency, many members of Congress, many prominent members of Congress. Some of those even had pledges of a great deal of financial support from the mega billionaire donors on the Republican side. Ultimately, though, however, they all decided not to do it. And some of them I urged personally to do it. In the end, they didn't do it. Now, I don't begrudge them their decision too much, because having made the decision to run myself, I know how deeply personal it is, and it's unlike any other decision I've ever made. And if you're not feeling up for it, you're not feeling up for it. But I wish one of them would have done it, because they all had name ID, they all had resources, infrastructure, all of that, but they didn't do it. And when I reached out to Better for America and asked, do you have somebody after the conventions? Do you have somebody? Hoping that I could jump on and be a senior member of the team. The answer was no, we do not have someone. And we don't think we're going to have somebody. And then they said, they asked me if I would consider it. And I said that I would. And so I spent the next 10 days not sleeping a lot. As you can imagine, it was, I certainly felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. The reason for that simply being that I knew that no one else was going to do this at this point. And if I said no, then really nobody would. And so, I spent a lot of time in this room. I feel comfortable sharing that, of course, I prayed about the decision, spent a lot of time searching the scriptures and a lot of time talking to friends and family and talking to the media, trying to test, you know, every variable that I could to determine on my own, using my own intellect, whether this was a good decision or not. Ultimately, though, I could not arrive at simply a logical conclusion that was compelling. And I went to a member of Congress who was a friend of mine who had been approached to do this and who had turned it down. And I said to him, how can I make this decision? What advice would you give me? And he said, look, you're gonna have to make it on your own. It's a decision that comes down to your conviction. And I thought that that was you know, an easy way out for him, not wanting to give me really honest advice. But I later realized that it was true, that only I could decide, and that it would come down to conviction because there were too many variables. I couldn't model it out. There was no way to do that. It came down to conviction, and it did come down to conviction. And what that conviction was that someone needed to do this. And then the next step, the next part of that was that if no one else was going to do it, that given that I was being given the opportunity, that I needed to do this. And I didn't know what the outcome would be. I don't know what the outcome will be. I have, you know, a realistic vision of what we're up against and what the probabilities are for different goals. We have a range of goals. But I ultimately felt comfortable doing this because I knew it was the right thing to do. And at the end of the day, even if we weren't able to even attract a percentage of support nationwide, which we've since surpassed, but even if we couldn't even do that, I knew it was right to stand up for what was true. Because if someone stood up for what was true, then there would still be that voice out there. There would still be some record of somebody standing up saying, no, this is not what we stand for on either side. This is what we stand for, these fundamental ideals that are enshrined in our Declaration of Independence and Constitution. Somebody had to stand for that. So that's what we did. And we've built an amazing team, and in several weeks, we have just generated incredible traction across this country to the degree that we now have millions of people across the country supporting what we're doing. And that amounts to a couple of percentage points when in the polls. But that'll